Hello, hi, hope you are well and doing great. In this video, we are going to talk about speech and thought presentation and what are 5 different ways of presenting speech or the thoughts of any character or of any person. First of all, if we just simply look at the definitions of different 2 or 3 definitions of speech and thought presentation, then we get to know that speech and thought presentation looks at how a speaker or writer presents the speech or thought of the other. In literature, it is the presentation of speeches and thoughts of any character. There are different range of ways in which writers and speakers can present others' words or thoughts, and the choices made and the choices that the speaker or the writer make in choosing what particular pattern of or what different way of speech presentation or what different way of thought presentation is determined what sort of impression the reader or listener will get of the party who is represented. Let me give you a simple example, then we are going to move ahead. For example, a politician might seek to affect voters' impressions of a rival politician by claiming to have access to their thoughts. Mr. John thinks. Now there is a politician who is talking about another politician or what the other politician thinks. Mr. John thinks he can get away with taking away people's livelihoods. Now, if you just read this sentence, now this has been uttered or in this sentence someone else is speaking about any other person or about the thoughts of any other person, but this can portray the rival in because he is in the opposite camp or he is an opponent politician in an uncomfortable light, even though the politician has no actual way of knowing what Mr. John thinks. How can he know that what Mr. John thinks? So there is a problem in that. So we use speech and thought presentation for number of purposes, and I have referred to one of the purpose for using speech and thought presentation. I have already referred to this definition. The main distinction between made within speech presentation is between direct speech and indirect speech. Direct speech is mostly seen as a norm and mostly it is used because it provides the direct account of what was said, while indirect speech we try to make some words of the narrator. There are a number of methods possible for presenting speech and speech or thoughts of others. And what are those methods? First of all, we have direct speech, then we have indirect speech, free direct speech, free indirect speech, and lastly we have narrative report of speech X. Now, if you just see this line of interference, and first of all, these are the basic methods of presenting speech of any character, and we again have the same methods of presenting thoughts of any character or thoughts of any other person. And then there is a line of interference, means how much narrator is in control of the report or how much narrator is intervening in the speech or thoughts of other character. If we just look at this, narrator apparently in total control. In narrative report of speech X, narrator is in almost total control, and over here narrator is in partially control, and at the end narrator is in not control at all. Why is it so? What is narrative report of speech Act? What is indirect speech? We are going to explain all these and their uses as well. Now, first of all, talking about direct speech. When we repeat word by word what the speaker or writer has conveyed is called direct speech, or we could say that when we report the exact words, of the speaker, or when we report the exact words of the thinker, then it is called direct speech. Direct speech gives us the feeling that as if characters are directly speaking, but the role of narrator as an intermediary is there. This means that as in the line of interference, I told you that partially in control in direct speech narrator is in power. Why? Because narrator has to perform the role of intermediary, and why there is not narrator present in free direct speech, I will explain you that. In direct speech we can have all these different types of sentences, and I hope so you have read and might have discussed narration in your previous classes as well. So there are certain rules that we need to remember for any direct speech. Both reporting, there are basically 2 types of clauses in any narration: reporting speech and reported speech, or you could say reporting clause and the reported clause. Indirect speech, both of them has to be used, and reporting clause could be used both at the end or at the start as well. After reporting clause we need to use comma, and then we use inverted commas. These rules are applicable just to the direct speech. You have to end the reported clause with the full stop. If the reported clause is assertive, then we are going to end it with the full stop. Negative or imperative sentence. If we have assertive, that you could say a declarative sentence, a simple sentence, or negative or imperative, then we are going to end it with full stop. If the reported clause is an exclamatory, then we are going to end the clause with exclamation mark, and if the sentence is interrogative, then it will end with question mark. Each new character speech starts on a new line, and you know these things if you read fiction or literature. Now moving on to some examples of direct speech. First example of assertive sentence, he said, I will come back here to see you again tomorrow. I have told you that first of all we need to have reporting clause, then we have reported clause. After that I told you that we need to use comma, and we use inverted commas as well. Then in the negative, what we are going to use, we are just using any expression that gives us a concept of negation. In interrogative we have two ways of forming questions. The first one is forming with the auxiliary, and the next one is starting with the WH word. Moving on, then we have imperative sentence. Imperative sentence is that in which we have order or request, you could say, and over here we haven't used any subject because we have the understood subject, and that would probably be you. He said, how lucky I am. Then this is an exclamatory in which we express our feelings, desires and wishes. That is called exclamatory sentence. Now it would be tough for you how we are going to convert any direct speech into indirect speech, but we need to memorize the rules. For direct speech I told you certain rules and you need to memorize them. First of all, reporting and reported clause. After that, use of comma, inverted commas, and but in the sentence structure we always have pronouns and verbs that we are going to talk about in indirect speech. What is indirect? Indirect speech is also known as reported speech. We may also see it referred to as indirect discourse or indirect narration. Why I have referred to all these? Because if in your paper it is asked that what is indirect discourse or what is indirect narration, then indirect speech is called indirect narration, and students get confused if they hear a new word but they have already read that. That is why I have referred to these terms. Indirect speech is the reporting of what someone else said in your own words. When we try to mold the speech of someone else in our own words but without changing the meaning, this is important, but without changing the meaning of what was said, that is called indirect speech. And again, there are certain rules of it. First of all, we need to see what reporting verb and what reported verbs are used. First thing, why? In order to decide the tense of the indirect speech. Tense of the indirect speech or tense of the reported verb actually depends upon the tense of the reporting verb. Use an appropriate pronoun for the object and the subject. We have to change, or we have to use an appropriate pronoun in the reported speech, and we make certain changes according to the rules of those pronouns. Addition of that. Thirdly, we add that. Fourthly, we have to choose an appropriate verb, use a proper word order. Mostly when we are having interrogative sentence, then we have a different word order, but when we are converting from direct speech into indirect speech, then we have to switch from interrogative sentence to the word order of assertive sentence. Notice the application of other rules while converting interrogative, imperative and exclamatory sentences. Now here are the examples that I have discussed earlier. Now here is the conversion of those examples. He said, I will come back here to see you again tomorrow. He said that I have told you that we need to use that in indirect speech of assertive sentence. After that, now moving on to pronoun. This is a first person pronoun, and we change first person pronoun according to the subject of the reporting speech. And over here we have used he because the subject is he, Then we have then I told you that we have to look at the tense of the reporting speech and the tense of the reported speech as well. Over here we have used past indefinite tense, and when we use past indefinite tense in the reported speech and in the in the reporting speech, and in the reported speech we have future tense, then we convert into the past form of that future tense. And there are rules of that, and you could watch my video on narration, and I hope so you would understand those rules, because it is tough for me to explain all those rules over here. He said Miriam does not like, or Miriam does not like biryani. Over here this is a negative sentence, and secondly we instead of using a pronoun we have used a noun. And he said, again, in the reporting speech we have past tense, and when we have past tense we have to convert the present indefinite tense into a past indefinite tense. तो हम उसके verb को present indefinite से किस में change कर देते हैं जी, past indefinite में. And there are rules let me explain those rules simply to you. Rules of verbs: if we have past tense in the reporting present or future tense in the reporting speech, we are not going to make any change in the verb of the reported speech. One thing. Secondly, if we have past tense in the reporting speech, then what we do, we change present indefinite into past indefinite, present continuous, present perfect, past perfect, present perfect continuous to past perfect continuous. Likewise, past indefinite to past perfect, and past continuous to past perfect continuous, and future indefinite and the other futures are converted into their second form of verb, like will be converted into would, or shall would be converted into should. Other than this, if we have past tense in the reporting speech and we have some universal truth in the reported speech, then we are not going to change the form of the verb. I think so it would be clear now. Now moving on to interrogative sentence, he said, do you still like her? He asked. In the previous sentences we have used said, but over here we have to use asked or inquired in order to show that it is an interrogative sentence. He asked me whether I still liked her. When we have auxiliary, then we do not use the same word, rather we use whether or if. After that, as you know that now over here we have used second person pronoun, and we have second person pronoun, we convert it into the object of the reporting speech, and over here I have put the object, and that is me, and according to the subject we need to use I, whether I still liked her. And the other rules are present indefinite tense, we have to convert it into past indefinite tense, and we also have to look at the order as well. Now there is another form of interrogative. So he said, what are you doing? He asked me what he was doing. Again, in this sentence I have used auxiliary. When we use auxiliary we have different rules of conversion, but when we use WH word, then we have to use the word as it is without making any change. Other than that, we do not use that in these sentences as well. Okay, moving on to imperative sentence. He said, bring me a glass of water. He ordered to bring him a glass of water. This is an imperative sentence, and in imperative sentence we could use order, requested, commanded, these verbs. Over here we have used said, past tense, that is why we have used past over here as well. He ordered to bring, this is an infinitive, so we have to use infinitive in order to not break the syntactic pattern of the sentence. She said, how lucky I am. This is an exclamatory sentence. She exclaimed with wonder, or you could say she exclaimed with joy, how lucky I. At the place of I, this is first person pronoun, we have to convert it with the subject, and of the reporting speech, how lucky she was. Present simple into past simple. Hope so it would be clear. Now moving on to third way of speech presentation, and that is free direct speech. In direct speech has two features which show evidence of the narrator's presence. And what are two? First of all, there is quotation mark, and the secondly we have introductory reporting clause. But if we are going to remove either of these, then we have what? Free direct speech. I think so it is clear. In direct speech we have quotation marks and reporting clause, and if we are going to remove these, then we have free direct speech. And I told you that in free direct speech we do not have presence of intermediary, or apparently we do not have presence of narrator. So if we just look at this example, let us look into the quick to and fro effect of the conversation between the two waiters and the confusion to which the reader is thrown in Hemingway's A Clean, Well Lighted Place. He's drunk now, he said. Now this is direct speech. After that we have usage of free direct speech, because we haven't used inverted commas, we haven't used reporting clause as well. He is drunk every night. After that we haven't used he said, he offered, he claimed, we said nothing. तो हमने ऐसी कोई चीज यूज नहीं की. तो ये जो सब के सब सेंटेंसेस होंगे ये आपके पास फ्री डायरेक्ट स्पीच की एक एग्जांपल होंगे. Let us consider another example by looking into how James Joyce in Ulysses, by running speech and narrative together through the omission of the inverted commas, creates the impression that the speech and narrative report are inseparable and relatively indistinguishable aspects of one state. Other than this, instead of the previous one that we can create confusion into the mind of reader, other than that we can also create this impression that speech and narrative report are inseparable, that the report of the narrator are inseparable, and that they are indistinguishable aspects. As Xenophon looked upon Marathon, Mr. Daedalus said, for example, over here we have used what you could say that direct speech, and after that we do not have used that direct speech. Free indirect speech. The form in between direct speech and indirect speech is called free indirect speech. First of all, we need to remember direct speech, reporting clause, use of comma, inverted commas. Indirect speech, in which we have use of that, removal of inverted commas, change of pronouns and verbs according to the rules of indirect speech. So आपने ये चीज याद रखनी है कि ये in between आएगा. Free indirect, as its name implies, normally thought of as a freer version of an ostensibly indirect form. Its most typical manifestation is one where, unlike in the reporting clause is omitted, but where the tense and pronoun selection are those associated with indirect speech. Now this is important. Again, now we have omitted what? First of all, we have omitted reporting clause. We omit reporting clause, but we use tense and pronoun according to that indirect speech. हम indirect speech का ही tense और pronoun use करेंगे. Just what we do, we omit reporting clause, and after omission of we automatically omit this that as well. He said that he would return there to see her the following day. Over here in free indirect speech we are going to omit these. He would return there to see her the following day. So there is you could say interference of narrator. Why? Because he has used not the exact words, because he has changed the verb as well, he has changed the adverb as well. So there is you could say somewhat a limited interference of narrator. It usually occurs in context of sentences of narrative when the third person narrator tells his tale in the past tense, mostly where it is mostly possible when a third person narrator is used and he is telling the tale in the past tense, thus taking a freer form seeming to be indirect speech, as in the portrayal of the lawyer Mr. Schaffer's speech in Persuasion. Then I take for granted, observed Sir Walter, this is direct speech, and after that you will notice the usage of free indirect speech, that his face is about as orange as the cuffs and caps of my livery. Mr. Shepherd hastened to assure him that Admiral Croft was a very hale, hearty, well-looking man, a little weather-beaten. Now if you have to read this, and after reading this, now let us come to the analysis. In the previous example, Sir Walter's speech is in direct form, appropriate for the speech of a man totally sure of himself. Mr. Shepherd's role, however, is that of a deferential functionary, and so Jane Austen uses the most self-affecting indirect form for him. He begins in indirect speech and then shifts from indirect to free indirect speech. And how it is marked, if you just have that paragraph in your mind, you will notice that this is marked by the absence of, first of all, by conjunction that, and secondly we haven't used the subject Admiral Croft, of which the effect is reinforced by dashes and colloquial lexical forms. Okay, moving on, and this is used in order to cast ironic light. This is important. Why? Because free indirect speech is mostly used in order to cast an ironic light on what the character says. It would seem that free indirect speech always uses past tense and third person pronoun, but it would be more accurate that the pronoun and tense selection has to be appropriate to the form of narration in which the free indirect speech occurs. For example, if we may return to the corner. So as we have claimed in the previous slide that past tense and third person, no, we could use other tenses as well. For example, corner scene in Bleak House, a scene which occurs in that portion of the novel, narrated in the present tense. So we could use any other tense as well, but through the eyes of third person narrator. Name Joe, nothing else that he knows on. Don't know that everybody has two names. No, we have used present tense. Secondly, how we could get to know that it is a free indirect speech and not free direct speech? Why? Because we have used third person pronoun, and third person pronoun is mostly used in which form of speech? In indirect speech. And other than that, we haven't used that this passage is in free and not is the usage of third person pronouns and appropriate markings on the verb. Other than that, we haven't used he said, he claimed, he thought. We haven't used such words. So there is omission of reporting clause. And secondly, we have used third person pronoun. That gives us the clue that this is an example of free indirect speech. Free indirect speech can contrast with other speech modes in the author's control of the light and shade of conversation, the highlighting and backgrounding of the speech according to the role and attitude. What role and what attitude the narrator is assigning to any character, according to that we have to shift or use our speech. This variation can also be used for more large scale purposes. For example, to channel our sympathies toward one character, a set of other characters away from another, we can use free indirect speech. And this is one of the most famous example and one of my favorite novels, that is Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. Whereas Michael Gregory has shown, Dickens mainly uses free indirect speech to portray speeches of those characters hostile to the central characters. This is important. Secondly, this choice allows him to cast an ironic light on what they say, and when any friendly witnesses come, he uses direct speech. To sum up, free indirect speech is used as a vehicle of irony because its occurrences on the indirect speech side of the direct speech allows for the introduction of the two point of view. We have two different point of view, we have two different perceptions, and we could look any character into more detail. Now coming to the last way of speech presentation, and that is narrative report of speech act. The possibility of a form which is more indirect than indirect speech is realized in sentences which merely report that a speech act has occurred, but where the narrator does not have to commit himself entirely to giving the sense of what was said, let alone, for example, he said he will come back here to visit her again. Now this is direct speech. And in indirect speech, I told you that we have to convert. We have to use certain words like he said that, and we omit the inverted commas as well. And in free direct speech, we leave this reporting clause, and in free indirect speech, we leave again the reporting clause and that as well. But in narrative report of speech action, we could change certain words as well. Sorry. Narrative report of speech act expresses author's point of view, comment and attitude. So when you add your own opinion, or when you add your own attitude, then your point of view, your ideology is also reflected. For example, he promised to return, he promised to visit her again. We could use certain words, we could use words like these. Narrative report of speech acts is useful for summarizing relatively unimportant stretches of conversation, and as can be seen, James Joyce that Mr. Darcy came from the pantry fully swathed and buttoned and independent, told them the history of his cold. Everyone gave him advice. So when we are summarizing unimportant stretches, and when we want to somewhat change the speech, change the meanings, then we use mostly narrative report of speech acts, and it is used, and it can also reflect author's point of view, comment and attitude. So today we have talked about 5 basic methods of speech presentation, and now moving on to presentation of thought. Many leading novelists of 19th and 20th centuries has deeply concerned with the portrayal of internal speech. Initially it was narrators were usually dealing with speech presentation, but now narrators have shifted their attention toward internal speech, or you could say thought. This is one of the basic reasons of for the last 100 years has to vividly flow has been how to present vividly the flow of thought through a characters mind. Hence, thought presentation has come to be inextricably linked with what is usually known as stream of you know what is stream of flow of thought. So when the mostly 20th century narrators are trying to present the thoughts of the character in comparison to why the actions or speeches. Why? Because there is nothing heroic left. We are mostly concerned with our minds. We are again and again thinking. That is why they are dealing with these things. Now, this is the categorization of thought present. He wondered, does she still love me? Direct thought. Same pattern, but over here we have used such reported verb that gives us the glimpse of thought. Does she still love me? Free direct thought. We omit in free direct thought the reporting clause. He wondered whether she still loved him. Indirect thought. Conversion. Did she still love him? Free indirect thought. He wondered about her love for him. Narrative report of thought action. That's all for today. If you have any question or query, you can type in the comment box, but for that you have to like and subscribe our channel. Thank you so much.